Welcome everybody to the webinar. This is the Profitable Regeneration webinar, and we're pleased to have Cory Carman here with us. We're going to kick off with a prayer, and I'll go ahead and offer that today, and then we'll give Cory an introduction. Our dear Heavenly Father, we are very grateful to be here, to be gathered together, to be able to learn about being stewards of the earth, to be able to learn about regeneration and how we can better feed our fellow man. We're grateful for Cory Carman and her expertise, her willingness to come and to be able to share her experiences with us. We pray that will bless those that are in attendance, those that will watch the recording, that they can learn and glean what they need to from what is said here today. And we pray that the technology will work to be able to broadcast this. And we are thankful for the abundance of blessings that we have. We pray for our families and for the land that we steward, for our livestock, and for our nation. And this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Hey, well, thank you. We are very pleased to have Cory Carman here with us today. She is a fifth generation rancher out of Oregon, and I had the privilege of being able to trade some cattle and with her a few years ago, visited her place. And just a top-notch person. She is a leader in the grass-fed industry, really one of the pioneers in being able to make grass-fed mainstream, to make it something that is a viable option for people to be able to purchase, both direct and from grocery stores. And so we're grateful that she's here with us and able to speak with us today to share her journey, her experience, and to be able to help us that are wherever we're at on this journey of regeneration, whether we're direct marketing, whether we want to direct market, or whether it's just we're interested in where our food comes from. And so I invite you to take notes here today. This is going to be an opportunity to ask Cory questions directly. You can do that by typing those questions in the chat or just raising your virtual hand, and we'll unmute you and you can ask those questions. But we're going to kick off, and Cory's just going to give us kind of an overview of who she is and where she's from and why she does what she does. So Cory, let's hear from you. What was it, just, and you'll probably get into this, but what was it that made you want to be a rancher? Like, is it something that you knew from the time you were little? Was it was it something that just kind of evolved over time?
Thanks, Jared, by the way, for the intro. I always knew I wanted to come back to the ranch. I didn't always expect that I would come back not too long after college. I thought I would kind of go out and do some other things, but I knew I wanted to be involved in the cattle industry. I knew I wanted to be involved in agriculture. I suspected it would be more from a policy standpoint. But when I came back to the ranch a few years after college, it was just really tough. And I really felt like if I wanted the ranch to be there, I needed to step up. And so that was kind of my own personal piece on my family side in terms of the timing. But yeah, I've always loved being on the ranch. I always loved the industry. Yeah, so I came back to my family ranch 20 some years ago, and I'd actually gone to college in California. And when I was in California, it really was the first time I'd been off the ranch in any sort of, meaningful long-term way. And I was really surprised at how many people had a negative view of livestock production, of the beef industry. And I realized that a lot of that had to do with feedlots. I mean, people's affiliations and associations with CAFOs and with feedlots was negative. And I got really curious about it was a very simplistic perspective, but just got curious about what were some opportunities, especially in a place where I lived, where there weren't a lot of feeding operations. What were some opportunities for us to grow cattle outside of a feedlot? And in particular, I was studying world food economy, and we were talking a lot about how we were going to feed people. And this idea that cattle can convert grass or cellulose, plant cellulose, into protein, that's something that is really important to feeding humans. There's a lot of grasslands that cover the earth, like something like a third of the earth is grasslands. And a lot of those grasslands you can't raise crops on. So cattle provide this really important service. And I just got curious about what we could do if we weren't sending them to a feedlot. I'd never had grass-fed beef. I didn't know that much about it. I started asking people about it. They told me it was bad, like to stay away from it. It's not good. It's really inconsistent. I mean, I heard all the rumors. But that was the beginning of living in California. And then eventually I actually moved to Los Angeles, where people were super health conscious and really into fitness and getting protein and clean protein. So even 20 years ago, I had some idea that there was demand out there for raising cattle in a different way and the health attributes that came along with that, the human health attributes. So when I went back to the family ranch and when we were struggling, and we'd been in the seed stock business, but it was just everything about it was hard. My grandma and my uncle were the only ones there, and they were trying to do a lot. And so I really thought that I could imagine an opportunity doing grass-fed beef. And it just seemed like it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I'd need to learn how to finish cattle on grass and a few other things, but just get them processed, sell the meat. I mean, it really just felt like it can't be that hard. And here I'm 20 plus years later, and it's still really hard.
What year was it when you got started, when you sold your first
2000, 2003, I took my first 2 steers to a slaughter plant, and it was the first time I'd ever even tried grass-fed beef. So
yeah, it's exactly 20 years ago then.
Yep.
Nice.
So I think there are a few things to talk about. I mean, we've done a lot of work on the home ranch. I took holistic management classes in ranching for profit, and we've made some transitions there that I'm excited about. But I think, I mean, that's not necessarily unique. A lot of us have done those type of things and made those type of transitions on our own places. The thing that I've done that's a little bit different is I started out with those 2 steers, and then I grew to like 8 or 10 steers. We kept growing, and basically, and then I started working with someone in the county in my area, and the 2 of us together, and we were both kind of multi-generation back. We started marketing beef from our 2 ranches together. So we basically did a seasonal program, and we were kind of in the mountains, and so we got up to, I think, between 400 and 500 head a year that we were marketing from our 2 ranches, and putting a lot of beef in the freezer so we'd have enough supply to get us through the winter. And it just, I mean, we got a decent return on the animals, but it wasn't like that. All that effort was generating a lot of profit. And so I ended up getting connected with a company that was importing from Uruguay. And they wanted to, so they had a bunch of distribution already established in the US. And they wanted to start a US grass-fed beef supply chain. So I started helping them put that together and realized that it's just, there's no kind of, the feedlots and the packers have done a really good job of creating a very efficient, connected, responsive industry at a really big scale. But I also feel like it's important for us as producers to have options. for me, the beauty of the grass-fed beef piece was that we could start to think about putting more pounds on those same animals that we'd invested in, getting more return, and then understanding that those cattle all have an impact on the land, being able to kind of manage that impact longer. By 2016 or so, I wanted to figure out, I was working for this other grass-fed beef company. We'd put together a supply chain, but it was still a challenge. And they were trying to go national and go big. And I really wanted to stay focused in our region. I felt like there was some cool things about the Northwest. And I wanted my own ranch to be part of it. I mean, I was buying cattle from Montana down to Oklahoma and Kansas, but we were processing in Denver. So
Wow.
At that point, I stepped back from that company and I worked with those same investors and basically asked them if they would be interested in investing in a regional grass-fed beef model to see what we could accomplish at a regional level. And they did. And so I took on some investment capital basically to provide it some working capital, because up until that point, all the grass-fed beef that we'd sold, we sort of self-financed holding that beef, and we didn't actually get paid until we'd sold every last cut. And I knew that if we were going to grow our program, most ranchers wouldn't be in the position to do that. And I frankly wasn't in the position to do that. Our banker on our operating line was like, you got to stop. Having beef on your balance sheet, because it's hard to value that.
Yeah.
In 2017, I knew that I could take the customers that I'd had in our little meat company that we were doing, just me, and I'd added some customers and drummed up some interest. And so we had the investment capital. I knew I could pay people, and I'd talked to a bunch of people that were interested. So, and some people that had already been raising grass-fed beef for a long time and marketing through other channels. So that was kind of our first year doing killing cattle every week. And we've done that ever since. So we're sort of 6 years into this. And I'll walk through a little bit. I think this is, at least when we talk to our customers, these are the main kind of attributes that we present to them. Mm-hmm. The latest thing that we've added on most recently is this, and these are some of our other producers that we work with on the Zumwalt Prairie. And I'll talk about this too. This is an experiment we've done recently with Sandpoint. But this is our producer group. It's where they're located. And obviously, the Eastern Montana guys, they're not shipping, they're providing younger animals into the program that might get finished at one of these other places. But between all of us, we work together to fill a schedule on a year-round basis. We don't harvest cattle on Thanksgiving week, and we don't harvest on Christmas. But every other week of the year, we put cattle, we harvest cattle, and we ship meat out, mostly into Portland, but we have kind of various customers all over the place.
When you say customers, are you selling wholesale?
Mostly wholesale. So I still sell some off the ranch direct in shares. And we have, on my home ranch, we have hogs also that we sell direct off the ranch. But this group, so my ranch contributes to this, and then those other ranches listed on the previous page all contribute. And the thing that we did most recently, so, certainly a lot of companies that have a grass-fed attribute, but the thing that we did most recently, and it was at the request of our main retail partner, which is New Seasons, and they have 19 locations, 19 retail grocery stores in the Portland area, is we got a Regenerative certification. So they wanted us to have a regenerative certification. We looked at, there's not that many out there right now, but we looked at several, and we had worked with Gabe Brown on a couple different projects, and we're familiar with him, and he'd spoken to our group before. So I knew that Gabe was going to launch a certification program based on like his work. And so I called him and I said, our retailers asking us to do this. They're actually going to fund the first round of certification. And are you guys getting close to releasing it? And they were. And so the cool part was that we were able to be one of the very first companies that got the certification that Gabe and the Understanding Ag crew designed, and they call it Regenerative. And so now we have that label on a lot of our packaging.
Yeah. And maybe we can talk a little bit.
Yeah.
You want to go into like the kind of the details of the certification?
Yeah. So here's just the super basics. So it's based on a tier system. And if you're a conventional producer, don't have any soil data or anything like that, then you start out at a tier 1 and you get an audit and you get some feedback and some recommendations. And then every 3 years, you need to move up a tier. So they demand continual improvement. And eventually you need to be at a tier 5, which is that over 80% of the land that you operate meets all the requirements for regenerative.
Mm-hmm.
Has
that been a big hurdle for your producers? Is it something that they were already on the path to doing, or were there like major changes that they had to implement?
No, we already had a focus on soil health, and have some really phenomenal managers in the group. A lot of them have a background in holistic management, and they all take a lot of pride in how they manage. But the farmers in particular, the regenerative standards are pretty onerous for them, especially if they're trying to do a cash crop. And so a lot of what we do is the farmers in our group plant cover crops. And so we rotate cattle through on cover crops, and it provides a nice fertility rotation for them, provides some revenue to plant a non-cash crop. Some of them use cover crops for erosion control, and the livestock will come through and harvest those. So it gives us a source of feed at times of the year when it's hard to get feed. And it gives them a source of fertility and revenue at a time of the year when they're not necessarily growing their cash crop. But so these are the things that we're evaluated on in the certification. And they're the principles of soil health. Mm-hmm. But as you can imagine, if you're a row crop, like some of these guys raise potatoes, right? Disturbance, armor, living roots, like these are all really hard things in a potato rotation.
Yeah.
But I got to give them, certification was really hard, and it made people frustrated, which I think is probably a good sign to some degree, because it meant we're all being pushed a little bit. And there are some producers in the group that are going to hit some limits as long as they're, trying to make a living as row crop or hay growers. They won't meet that 80% threshold on their ground, but we're evaluated as a group. And so as long as our cattle spend 80% of their life on certified ground, we can continue moving up. But it's definitely, I think it's been a really helpful standard and a really helpful framework for all of us to have.
Yeah, thanks for going there and kind of giving an overview of that. I think there's a lot of value in a certification like this. Just to kind of give a scope, approximately like how many acres is the group representing, Cory?
So what's certified, and some of these guys have BLM or Forest Service allotments beyond this, but what is certified and included in the farm plans is 220,000 acres. And so, and we'll probably add to that because the auditors did want to start including at least some of the Forest Service ground, even though it's hard to audit that stuff and we don't have a ton of control.
Right. Oh, that's good. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And then these are just some of our pictures of how we sell the beef, how we present it. We work with a lot of high-end restaurants and, making the case to them that this is a high-end product. It's not, a lean, chewy, tough. I'm sure, Jared, all the stereotypes that we.
Has that been a challenge to provide that consistency, Cory? And how have you bridged that? I mean, there's so many parts and pieces to producing quality grass-fed beef, from the forage and soil health to the genetics to the low stress livestock handling to time of year when you're trying to finish. There's just it's a science, but it's also, I think, a lot of art to it. How do you bridge that gap to be able to ensure when you say this is a quality product that you're not going to disappoint?
Yeah. Well, we have disappointed, I'll be honest. It's not.
I think we all have.
I think I give a ton of credit to the group. I mean, one of the things that I was pretty clear about is I didn't want to start a company that was where people learned how to finish grass-fed cattle. Like, if people want to learn, you can usually find some friends, neighbors, relatives to buy 5 or 10 head worth of custom beef, and you can start to, and frankly, that's how I started. And I think it's a really good place for people to start to try it, to see, calibrate your eye to what a finished animal looks like. I mean, I hadn't looked at finished animals really close since my 4-H steers when I was growing up. And so making sure that you know what finished looks like, trying it, seeing the cattle on the rail. So I wanted people that they were already in it. They'd already been. And I think, I mean, frankly, that's probably been the biggest reason we've been successful. And it hasn't been perfect by any stretch. I mean, when we have rough winters and everybody's, starts off in the springtime 50 or 80 or 100 pounds behind, it's been hard to catch up. And we've sent in cattle that weren't finished the way we wanted them to. The drought, in 21 was super rough. We just couldn't. So we do certainly have to play with weather a lot more. But generally speaking, everybody in the group focuses on a specific time of year. They know we've all done it for 6-7 years as this particular group, focusing on these times. So we're starting to get know what our cattle have to weigh at different points of the year. We also trade around sometimes if somebody's cattle are coming along better than someone else's. A lot of the cattle get aggregated in sort of the Ellensburg, Quincy, Washington area. And so those cattle are we can pull the ones that are ready. And obviously the bigger group you have to pull from, the more consistency you can get and the more finish you can get. So I think the combination of, I mean, in a lot of ways, I've just put together a lot of really conscientious producers that were already doing the soil health work and given them an opportunity to keep moving forward in that by having these audits and having the soil health data and having people come and teach us how to analyze the data and what it means to us. They were already raising grass-fed cattle or finishing cattle, already accustomed to, raising a livestock animal for a market. And I sort of just facilitate the opportunity for them to continue doing that and for us to do it collectively. So I don't know if anybody has any. We can talk about processing, we can talk about wholesale distribution, we can talk about what not to do in grass-fed beef or even outside of grass-fed and selling direct, how we got our customers. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything in particular that people have interest in that would be helpful.
Yeah, feel free to raise your virtual hand. Go ahead and unmute if anybody has questions, or they can type the questions into the chat. Um, so, currently, where are you processing?
We're processing in just south of Salem, Oregon. He's actually a lamb guy named Reed Anderson. He does a lot of lamb business, processes a lot of lambs in Oregon. And he built an on-farm processing plant, and he built a beef side. So he does mostly lamb, but he does a few truckloads a week of beef, and we're one of those.
And is it competitive on the cost? I know that's one of the challenges with competing with imports and with feedlot beef, is that our processing costs are so much higher. Is there the economy of scale that it's like, is it competitive, or is it still quite a bit more than what it would be if you're going to process at one of the bigger packing plants?
He has pretty decent fees in terms of they're not astronomically higher than but what he doesn't have is a drop credit. So that puts us about $100 behind, depending on what hides are going for or whatever. So, but on a straight up tolling fee, he's actually not that more, $25 to $50 a head. It's just that when you factor in the drop credit, that's when there's a real differential there.
Go ahead, Tanya.
I was just wondering if I put my email in the chat, if you could email me that slide where it talks about the requirements for the Regenerative certification.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I really learned a lot from your presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's good. Sean Cunningham asked, when you say wholesale, are you mostly selling to grocery stores? He's mentioned some restaurants also, but who's your biggest buyer and how's that break out?
Yeah. So I joke with my crew on the meat company side that we only have to do one thing, and that is we sell every cut that comes on the cows every week, and that's it. But finding the customers for every cut in the proportion that it comes on the cow is a challenge. And the combination of retail and food service, so food service meaning not just restaurants, but also, campuses, corporate campuses, university campuses, we sell to hospitals. So sort of all of that different, we have customers that do mail order, and we'll provide them beef for sort of a mail order service. So trying to stack all those different customers together in the right quantities is definitely the challenge of what we do. And the restaurants are great. So it's a combination. We sell to a burger joint that has, I think, 40 different locations. We sell to a kind of couple fast casual sort of Mexican places that braise, chuck, or use a bottom round, sort of those in meat cuts. We sell to some fine dining, high-end steakhouse type places that want to have a grass-fed on there. But about half of what we do is into retail. And that's pretty nice because they take a little bit of most cuts. They take a lot of our thin meats. They also take a lot of grind, different fat contents of grind, as well as some of the middle meats and the steak cuts.
Mm-hmm. And do you dry age, wet age? How's it? Do you ship primals? What's your kind of?
We ship, yeah, no, we're a pretty quick turnaround. We used to have a dry aging program, and we do have one restaurant that continues to ask for dry aging, but we just chefs were the ones who wanted it, and they were also the ones that were never willing to pay for the yield loss and the cost of it.
Yeah.
So we do have one Seattle restaurant that will dry age primals, but our cattle are shipped on Tuesday, killed on Wednesday, cut on Thursday and Friday, and they're at the distributor the following Monday.
Okay. Yeah. What would you say has been like the biggest growing pain that you've experienced, and how did you overcome that? From scaling from 2 head to now you're saying a couple thousand a year, processing every week.
I think it's the same problem. It's just different scales. And even when I was working for the other meat company and we were working with Creekstone, or, times that I've been up to the agri-beef processing plant in Toppenish, it's like, it's all the same problem. You just have to sell all the cuts.
Yeah.
And if you're at a farmer's market and you're just trying to figure out who is going to take that top round roast, or if you're a wholesale meat company and whatever. I mean, every single week we sit down collectively and we look at what our cutout is for the week, what type of margin we think we're going to get based on selling those cuts. We look at what we didn't sell from the previous week, anything we don't think we have demand for in the coming weeks. I mean, I think the only difference is it never gets easier. You just get kind of used to doing it. And yeah, I think it's about creating the discipline to make yourself do it each week and look at the right numbers. And
Yeah, that I can appreciate that. Somebody who hasn't started a direct marketing company, again, we're pretty naive when we get started. We think it's going to be easy, and then realize there's a lot of moving pieces. Another question: have you had quality issues with wet aged? Is it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I personally think you get a better eating experience if you can put a little dry age on the middles. It is hard because the cost associated with dry aging a whole carcass and your yield loss when you're trying to survive on super thin margins, right? So we are trying to just pay our crew, not even necessarily make any money, but give a really good return to the ranchers to cover their cost of production. And then we sell it to a grocery store. Well, we sell it to a distributor, and they're going to mark it up, maybe 20%. And then they're going to sell it to the grocery store that's going to mark it up maybe another 40%. So there's so much more profit, or dollars anyway. So we're just trying to survive on very little, and selling a dry aged chuck roast where you might have lost, 6 or 8%, like we might not even make 6 or 8% profit, right? So giving up that weight when the customer can't tell the difference is really hard. So then, but where you really can tell the difference is on those middle meats. So your New York steaks, your tenderloin less so, but your New Yorks and your ribeyes. And I do think having a little bit of dry age on those is really nice from a texture standpoint. But again, usually people aren't willing to pay for it. And the retailers are even a little reluctant about it because they sell based on visual appearance. And so any sort of browning or discoloration or oxidation means that it's lost it, regardless of what it tastes like or whether or not it's good. It really, visual appearance is super important to those retailers. So we just give them what they ask for, and they do like a little bit of time in the bag, so wet aged, but yeah, nobody's willing to pay for the dry aged. We were doing like a small direct to consumer program. I mean, certainly on our cow share program. So we do maybe 80 head a year in a cow share program. And those, we always hang whole carcasses there. So individual consumers will pay for it, but wholesalers that are trying to mark it up and make money, they're way more reluctant.
Mm-hmm. Your direct to consumer, are you custom exempt, or do you still go through USDA?
Yep. No, we're custom. We're on farm slaughter and custom exempt.
Oh, okay. Nice. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What can you kind of give an overview of the grass-fed industry? Um, and uh, you've seen it pretty much evolve kind of from conception, I would say. I mean, wouldn't you say it kind of started in the early 2000s? And I don't know if you can speak to like what percentage of meat is currently being grass-fed. I'm sure it's pretty tiny, but and how that's grown and kind of how this industry's evolved, Cory.
I think at one point I heard, and not too long ago, that it was something like 7% of US beef was grass fed, but a lot of that was the cull cow market. And so it's more like 3 that were, fat cattle. And I don't know, I've always thought that we would see a little bit of a tipping point. I mean, look at a lot of countries that have both, a robust grass-fed industry and a robust grain-fed industry. And based on market conditions or access to feed, producers can kind of go back and forth and decide what they want to participate in. And I imagine that as consumer demand picked up and we saw more demand over time, that we would see a similar thing come to happen in the US. And we really haven't. I mean, there are certainly, it's growing as a category and we're continuing to see growth. But when you're kind of 3% of $100 billion industry, that growth still doesn't add up
Yeah.
that many times. So I still like to believe that at some point we'll see more domestic production, but scaling it is super challenging. And, there's a couple companies out there that have tried to go bigger and have to some degree gone bigger, but I don't know. I don't get the impression that any of them are super profitable. And I also think that a lot of the things that consumers get excited about with grass-fed, which is that livestock land interaction and the positive impact of that and the health aspects, those sort of get lost as companies scale because they're really trying to compete with imports. And so efficiency is super important. And they're, kind of, they look more like feedlot programs that just aren't using.
How much of the 3% is domestically raised? Any idea?
Well, that would be domestically raised with that 3%. But what I don't know is how much is imported.
Yeah.
And I do think that number is quite a bit higher than the 3%.
Yeah. And would you say the imports, are they a direct competition to you, or do you kind of have your own brand loyalty and market to where you don't have to worry about somebody like coming in and undercutting you and losing your customers?
Both, honestly. Generally speaking, if somebody wants to pay for an attribute, right, just like a claim that they can put on a menu or at a retailer, and if they want to, I mean, our grocery store here is Safeway, and they have grass-fed ground beef from Australia there, and so they're not looking at like local or domestic or anything like that. They just want that grass-fed attribute. So if a company is just looking for that, we're never going to be the most affordable way to get that attribute. That's always going to be an imported product. But if a company if they're looking for beef that's like transparency, soil, the regenerative certification, to know what region it comes from, or to, our hospital customer, for example, they weren't even that concerned about the grass-fed attribute. They were mostly concerned about the fact that it's a teaching hospital and they're funded by the state. And so they felt like it's really important to them that they were putting money back into the region in every investment that they could. But at the same time, there was a Wagyu, the New Zealand Wagyu program called First Light that was in our retail. And it definitely, people have this kind of idea about Wagyu being, a super premium. And so that was, we definitely lost business when they were there. So that's an example of times where it has taken business from us. But generally speaking, if people want the least expensive grass-fed option, they'll go with an imported or a cull cow program.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a cull cow program? Do you have just a grind, or is everything cut?
We will supplement sometimes within our producer group if we're just super tight on ground beef. We'll include some cows in the program, but not too often. But it is the one thing that you can sort of adjust the volume on. Only one way. You can only make it go up.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't pull any cuts out of the cows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. So when you started back in the early 2000s, looking back, did you have any vision of where this would grow to, that you would be at the scale that you're at today?
I actually thought it would be bigger.
Really? Yeah.
I think it just, once we got to a truckload a week, I suspected, even then, I thought we would get to 2 or 3 in the next 5 years or so. And we've really been kind of stuck at this truckload a week level for the last 3 years. And part of that had to do with COVID. I mean, when we were half retail and half food service, we lost all of our restaurant customers overnight. And so managing through that, and we're just now kind of back half and half again. But all those chefs that we knew and had relationships with and commitments from, most of them are out of business now. And so now we're kind of like, okay, well, we made it through COVID. We have our restaurant business back. We've stabilized. Things are going great. And of course, then the cattle market just starts skyrocketing. And so now we're struggling to compete from a price standpoint. Our prices are just getting so.
Yeah, it makes sense. What would you say to somebody that's just has a passion for the grass-fed side and they want to get started? What would you encourage them to do?
I do think selling animals custom or direct to consumer in shares, in quarters, halves, whatever is a great place to start. I mean, if somebody really is really just starting, and I'm biased because that's how I learned. I just spent a lot of time at the butcher shop, little town where I'm at, and watched them cut and cooked the cuts, and there's just nothing like really. I think it's important to understand what you're selling and to have some experience and have a point of view about it. But when it comes to growing, I've given presentations quite a bit, sort of encouraging people not to start a grass-fed company. And it doesn't make sense economically yet unless you've got really the right deal. I mean, once you start breaking that cow apart and selling cuts individually, you really have to have outlets for every cut or a sales force. So I think my biggest advice is to sell whole carcass or shares, or like don't go into a cut program. And if you do it ideally with a company that's already doing it that you can collaborate with, or with somebody that already has that expertise, because it is hard if you have a passion to be on the land and raise cattle and be in your community. The last thing that is actually fun is sorting boxes in freezers and trying to show up at farmers markets. And I mean, this, it's just, it's a very different job than the one you signed up for. And some people love it, but most people that I've been around get into it and wish that they were back on their ranch.
Yeah, that's valuable. I can see Sean smiling. I think he and I are both we've been on that end, and we know that we want to provide a quality product for the customers, and land regeneration in and of itself is great, but if it's just going to be, the product is going to become adulterated when it goes through the next steps, before it reaches the consumer. I have a hard time with that, and maybe that's idealistic, but I remember one day in church, I don't remember why this comment came up, but a seasoned rancher said, if we switch to grass-fed, America would starve. And I kind of bowed up a little bit, but then I realized, he's absolutely right. We are not geared. We don't have the genetics. We don't have the expertise. We don't have the pasture land. So if all of a sudden corn becomes too high priced to feed the cattle, we're going to have to figure out really quick how to do that. But you're right. He was right. Maybe we wouldn't starve, but certainly, the industry that's been created is not geared towards grass fed. So
Totally. Yep. And, if we put that same type of investment, when we first had a glut of grain that we needed to get rid of, and we were trying to put weight on cattle and trying to put grain through cattle, we made a lot of investment in developing the systems that we have today. And I think we could do some pretty cool things if we put that same type of investment in figuring out how to finish grass-fed cattle, integrating cattle into cropping systems, focusing on land regeneration. There's a lot we could do, but right now we're trying to get consumers to support that work, and it's an uphill battle.
Absolutely, it is. And so I've always thought maybe that would be the thing, if we did have to pay full price for the concentrates, corn and soybeans, as Joel Salatin points out, it doesn't make sense. Like a lot of things that go on in our country, there are more calories put in than the calories given off. And so if we had to pay that price, we'd be forced to switch to more of a forage-based diet.
Yep.
And grain-fed would probably be the niche, right? So whether or not we get there, I'm sticking to my guns. I think it's important that we learn how to finish cattle on grass. I think it's important that we have start having the infrastructure to be able to support that. And so you've certainly been a huge part in that. And this might be the last question I have, and if anybody else wants to jump on here before we end, and then I'll wrap up with a few things. But mindset, Cory, has there ever been a time when you thought you might quit, and if so, what got you through that?
Yeah, all the time, like maybe last week. Not on the ranching side, on the grass-fed beef side for sure, because it just feels like we keep, every time you fix one thing, something else falls apart, and it just never ends. But I think the thing I always come back to is, I've got this great group of producers that are committed. I have great investors that aren't expecting to make money on this. They just want to see it move forward. And I just have a lot of advantages that other people don't have. And I've never wanted to live in a world where you couldn't finish cattle on grass. And so if somebody's not out here trying to do this, then, that's the world we're going to have is just selling commodity cattle or into feedlot programs. And I want us to have other options. So I can either complain about it or I can just keep working on it.
Yeah, well, certainly Certainly, and that's a good attitude to have, right? And not that we need to pit ourselves against anybody else, is just do the best that we can with what we have, the resources that we've been given. And yeah, so just kind of in conclusion here, I thought I'd share something this morning, and I don't know if it's for my benefit or somebody else's, but we have an abundance of forage, and it seems odd that here it is almost October and we're shipping cattle in. Normally we're shipping cattle out. We've just been blessed with some tremendous summer rains, and so my ideal would be to, send cattle that were going to be grass finished. But we found a customer that they are going to go through more of the commodity system. They're going to be finished in a feedlot. But we do feel like, God's hand was in it. Like, we were able to find somebody who could meet our criteria. They're very flexible on their in and out dates. And basically we were just warehousing these cattle for them before they go to the feedlot. And so we're going to do our best within the stewardship that we have to provide the best care. Our crew's actually up finishing processing 7 loads that came in last night about midnight. So maybe that was my lack of sleep this and pondering, and maybe it was inspiration. But I thought about in the Old Testament in 2 Kings when Elisha was faced with a very challenging circumstance. His enemy had surrounded their city, and his servant came to him and said, "Alas, master, what shall we do? Things don't look very good here. Like, we're outnumbered. We're clearly, there's no way we're going to get out of this alive." And so Elisha offered this prayer. He said, "Fear not, they that be with us are more than they that be with them." And his prayer was, he prayed that his servant's eyes could be opened, that he could see. And when they were opened, he beheld mountains full of horses and chariots and fire around Elisha. For whatever reason, I needed to hear that, because sometimes I feel outnumbered. I feel like, man, the odds are against us. Like, there's no way we're going to win, either financially or whatever it might be that's weighing us down. And so I needed that reminder. They that be with us are more than they that be against us. And so I guess that's just my encouragement, that if you ever feel downtrodden, you feel like, there's not hope, truly there is. And ultimately, the Lord fought that battle for them, and there was not bloodshed, but they won the battle. And we don't know how our battle is going to be won, right? I imagine that maybe we think, well, we want to go annihilate our enemy or whatever. And sometimes that's not the Lord's plan for us. It's better that we go about it peaceably, as Elisha did, if you continue reading that story. So Cory, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for what you are doing for the industry. It's a great service. And yes, and I can vouch, been able to sell cattle years ago to you, and actually traded for some hogs that we sold direct marketed. And it was a great experience, and it was a win-win. And I think that that's, what you're providing for those producers. And that's a need in the world today, is to be able to have somebody, because like you say, not everybody wants to be the face out there direct marketing. Like we know how sometimes unfun it is. And so that's pretty ideal if we can just sell a quality product and can be branded, even if it's somebody else's brand. So any final words, Cory, before we jump off here?
I don't think so. Thanks, Jared. Thanks for putting this together, and getting out there and helping everyone.
Well, that's our mission. So yeah, if you're new to this, Ag Steward is the company that we represent. And so our mission is to help family farmers and ranchers become highly profitable, regenerate the land that they steward, and create and transfer viable businesses to the next generation. And that's a big task. That's a big order to fill. If that's something that resonates with you at any point of that, whether it's creating the profitable business, or if you're in that transition state of bringing in the next generation, those are things that we help with. And we're building a good team to be able to do those. I'm not the expert in all this. I just feel like I'm kind of the messenger and maybe the conduit for some of this. But we would love to be able to help you. And the way to reach out is just respond to the email that you received and schedule a time, and we'll jump on a call and be able to see if it is the right fit to work together. Okay, thanks everybody.